some people think monsters are just made up. But what if some of them are actually connected to science? Deep in the Gobi Desert, there are stories about a strange creature. Legless, giant like a worm, said to spit acid and even shoot electricity. Sounds like a wild tale, right? But the curious thing is, many real expeditions have gone out looking for it, and not just for fun. These are stories full of mysteries, curiosities, and even some historical facts that make you wonder. Is it really just a legend? The Gobi is an extreme place, with sounds that come out of nowhere and fossils that changed what we know about dinosaurs. Nature out there is like nothing else. In this video, you'll see how some so-called monsters might actually be real animals living in extreme conditions. And science is still trying to figure them out. In 1990, a group of Czech scientists decided to travel to the Gobi Desert, way over in Asia, in search of a very strange creature. They were looking for the famous Mongolian death worm. According to local stories, this creature could grow up to almost 2 meters long, spit acid, and even shoot electricity. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? But here's a curious fact. Many people who live in that region truly believe it's real. And the most interesting part is that locals talk about the worm like it's just another dangerous desert animal. The Czechs brought special equipment with them, like a device that hits the ground to try and hear sounds from underground. But even with all that technology, they didn't find anything. No tracks, no bones, nothing to prove the worm actually exists. Still, that expedition became part of history. And do you know why? Because it was the first major attempt to search for this mysterious creature using science. And even without results, it caught the world's attention. This kind of adventure shows how the mysteries of nature still fascinate people. And when a question remains unanswered, well, there's always someone ready to try again. After the Czech expedition, people from all over the world became curious about the so-called Mongolian death worm. One of the most excited explorers was Ivan McCurley, who returned to the Gobi Desert several times, trying new ways to find the creature. He even used a plane to fly over the desert, hoping to spot some strange movement in the sand from above. But once again, nothing showed up. Still, the number of curious minds kept growing. Teams from the United States, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand also organized their own expeditions. What began as a local legend was now attracting worldwide attention. And here's a fun fact. The more people searched, the more stories came up, but still no solid proof. In 2005, a group of British monster hunters went there with a very different idea. They created wet areas in the desert, like small oases, hoping to attract the worm. They also handed out flyers to locals, asking them to report anything strange. It may sound funny, but it shows how deeply people were drawn into this mystery. They only found old tales, nothing physical. Yet, these stories passed down through generations continue to fuel the imagination of those who love curiosities. Which brings up a big question. Where did this powerful legend even come from? The first time the so-called Mongolian death worm appeared in Western records was in 1926. The man behind this was Roy Chapman Andrews, a famous American explorer at the time. He traveled to Mongolia and listened to stories from local leaders about a scary creature that lived in the desert sands. The most curious part, Roy was so iconic that people say he inspired the character Indiana Jones. He carefully wrote down everything he heard, treating it like an important historical fact. Even though he never saw the worm himself, he gave the legend strength by taking the Mongolian stories seriously. Many years later, a scientist came across a real snake called the Tartar sand boa. It's thick, lives in dry places, and isn't venomous. When local Mongolians saw it, they said it looked a lot like the death worm. And here's a fascinating fact. Could the legend have started with sightings of this snake? Or was the snake mistaken for something even stranger? No one knows for sure. What we do know is that the local culture sees the worm as a symbol of danger. It's proof that a creature can gain amazing powers just through imagination and stories passed down from generation to generation. But what if this worm wasn't even a worm to begin with? There's one detail a lot of people forget. Maybe the name death worm is just a bad translation. That's right. In Mongolian, the word used can mean any dangerous creature without legs, like snakes, for example. So the worm doesn't even have to be an actual worm. And that changes everything, doesn't it? This is one of those interesting facts that makes you rethink everything you've heard. The creature might be real, just not in the way people imagined. It could be a snake, a strange kind of lizard, or even an animal science hasn't discovered yet. Even though the stories say it can spit acid or shoot electricity, no one has ever found real proof of this creature. No skin, no bones, no tracks. Still, that hasn't stopped people from being fascinated. The Gobi Desert holds so many mysteries, and maybe that's what draws people in. It's a huge, quiet place full of surprises. And here's a curious fact. Scientists discovered the very first dinosaur egg nests ever recorded, right there in the Gobi. The desert might not have revealed the death worm just yet, but it holds sounds, shapes, and strange phenomena that make it feel like it's always ready to tell a new story. Now here's something wild. The Gobi Desert makes sound. Yes, sound. Back in the 13th century, Marco Polo wrote that he heard strange noises while crossing the desert. He said it sounded like music, almost like the desert itself was singing. At the time, this became one more of the many mysteries tied to the Gobi. But centuries later, science came up with an explanation that's actually a pretty interesting fact. There's a phenomenon called singing sands, and it happens when very dry sand slides down huge dunes. The friction between the grains creates a low sound that seems to come out of nowhere, almost like a natural song. These sounds don't happen the same way everywhere. They depend on the shape of the sand grains, the size of the dune, and even a hard layer beneath the surface. When all these things line up just right, the desert becomes a natural stage with its own built-in acoustics. And the most curious part, people who hear it usually can't tell where the sound is coming from. It just appears and disappears like the desert is alive. Strange, right? And it only makes the legend stronger. Because if a desert can sing, who's to say it isn't also hiding strange creatures beneath the sand, waiting for the perfect moment to show up? Now tell me this. After everything you've just seen, do you still think monsters are only made up? What else could be hiding out there, in places almost no one dares to go? If strange creatures and mysterious sounds have already been reported in the Gobi, who's to say there aren't more secrets waiting to be uncovered? Nature still holds so many curiosities that science has barely started to explore. And maybe, just maybe, some of these legends have more truth in them than we think. Which story made you think the most? Do you believe the death worm could actually be real? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed diving into these mysteries of the desert, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll keep discovering the most amazing secrets of nature and the interesting facts that few people ever talk about.